Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, may I call for your attention for our last session today. It's on funding instruments and strategy, and we are glad to have Sequeira here, who will inform us about Horizon Europe and Europe's strategy on research and innovation. Thank you for coming here.
Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. I know the Deputy Director General, Wolfgang Butcher, also gave an introduction this morning. I wanted to start with a story that I know Commissioner Moedas has used on several occasions, and he gave the example of the experience with the superconducting super collider. And the story here, which many of you in the room will know, I think in 1993, there was already 2 billion euros that had been spent about the feasibility, the construction of a new super collider in Texas. And then the decision taken was to cancel this project, and very much the mantle went to CERN and the Large Hadron Collider. And Commissioner Moedas uses this story to make the point that even a country like the US, it is not possible to fund this kind of infrastructure by a single country. And the message he takes from it is what made the difference with CERN was the fact that this was an international project bringing together countries, and it was only in this way that infrastructure of this kind of magnitude can be financed. So I wanted to sort of start with this story, which is a story that Commissioner Moedas has used very often to talk about the importance of what we do in Europe and the importance of an international effort in this area. What I wanted to tell you about is a little bit where we are in the preparations, the design, the thinking behind the new framework program for research and innovation, Horizon Europe. And I think across all parts of it, there you will be able to see that there is a relevance for the study of fundamental matter. When we started out with this exercise, the first thing we did was to go around and to ask people what was the experience with the current program, Horizon 2020. And our starting point was that everybody told us that Horizon 2020 has been a hugely successful program. So actually, we have a lot of continuity from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe. I found it very interesting. I've been involved in the development of several framework programs. And in all previous framework programs, the number one complaint from the research community was about simplification. So it was very interesting to see that when we started on Horizon Europe, the number one complaint of the research community was not about simplification, which I think shows that we've made a lot of progress in this area. The number one complaint from the research community was about oversubscription. The success rates were too low. There were too many good proposals that were not being funded. So we've seen this kind of transition where actually we have a very successful program, and we would like to build on this success in Horizon Europe. If I can now enter the next level of sort of detail in the design of Horizon Europe, we are sticking very much with the same architecture as we have in Horizon 2020. The first block, which you will know very well, is really about excellent science. And in this block, you will find the European Research Council, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, and the Research Infrastructures Programme. And indeed, all of these have been contributing to the study of fundamental matter. I saw a figure this morning that if you look just at the European Research Council and you look at how much funding has gone into this area, you see that we have spent nearly 1 billion euros on fundamental science to study the fundamental nature of matter. So this is hugely important. I know the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions and the training actions have been very, very important. And of course, the Research Infrastructures Programme, which has supported the feasibility, the concept study, which we are discussing today. So we have seen across this block of activities a huge degree of success. So from the Commission side, and we now have the agreement with the Council, Member States, and of the European Parliament, we do not foresee any real changes. The one thing that we would like to change is the budget for this amount. So we would like to increase the budget for this activities supporting excellent science. We would like to increase in particular the budget for the European Research Council, but this is the element which has not yet been agreed with the Council and Parliament. So it will be very, very important as we move towards the autumn that this whole question about the value of science, the value of European programs for science, is communicated as clearly as possible, because this will be when the key decisions are made about the future budget. The second block of activity is about collaborative research. In Horizon 2020, we have focused this on societal challenges. For the next Horizon Europe program, we are calling this global challenges. Our experience, the feedback from this part of the program is again one that has been very successful. Probably the major concern about this part is that although it is very well known and appreciated by the scientific community and by the industries and companies that take part, the visibility of this program is very limited outside the research community. People do not know that we have been funding fantastic research in health, in energy, in materials, in digital, all these areas which are incredibly important. So the first major new element that we will introduce in Horizon Europe is the concept of mission-orientated research and innovation. And the idea here is very much to provide in a way that society, that people can understand, some goals for research. So if I can take an example, at the moment we have a flagship project called the Human Brain Project, which some of you may be familiar with. This project is to try and simulate, to provide a model of the human brain. It is providing fantastic research, very, very interesting insights into brain disease, into Alzheimer's, all sorts of areas. The difficulty we have is the Human Brain Project is not something that is easy for someone on the street to understand what we're doing. If you frame this in terms of providing solutions, providing cures for mental diseases, for dementia, for Alzheimer's, it's immediately obvious to everybody why this needs to be funded. So this new element will be not so much a radical change, but to define, and we are just starting this process now, some very high-level missions, ambitious missions, to drive both the research, the innovation, but also so that people around Europe can see what we're doing and understand why Europe is funding and what Europe is funding in research and innovation. In this part of the program, we also have the support for the underlying technologies. So we will be supporting digital, we will be supporting sensors, we will be supporting new materials. So I think a lot of the technologies which you were talking about in this project and which will be needed for the future Collider, this is where we would aim to support these underlying technologies, these underpinning innovations. If I move now to the third major block of what we foresee and what we've agreed for Horizon Europe, this is the area where there is the main novelty, which is the establishment of a European Innovation Council. And the aim here is to provide a clear, simple support for the best innovators across Europe, in a bit the same way that the European Research Council does for the best scientists and the fundamental scientists across Europe. So I know our next speaker, Carlos Oliveira, has been one of the people that's been helping us to design this whole idea of the European Innovation Council. So we'll tell you more about it. What I would like to say is that we have taken a lot of inspiration from the ATTRACT project, which is taking place in CERN. And really what we've been trying to learn from this is that if we are serious about funding breakthrough innovation, we have to really change the way we think about support. We have to be much faster, we have to be agile, we have to be working with venture capitalists, with companies, and we have to change our mindset from the classical R&D projects, which is the area that we are most familiar in supporting in the Commission. So this will be a very new area for the Research Framework Programme. As I've already hinted, we think this is also very relevant for science and for fundamental science. If you look at areas like sensors, like visualization, this has got the potential to have a lot of innovation, and really the European Innovation Council will be trying to identify, trying to support these areas of innovation. So we will bring into this the current Future and Emerging Technologies program, so we will have a program that can support both the advanced technologies together with the acceleration and the commercialization of the ideas. We are doing various new things that we are piloting already. So if I can give you an example, it has already been announced but will be launched later this week. We will be recruiting a number of what we call program managers as experts in the field to work inside the Commission to help us manage projects in fast-moving technologies. So this is about a shift from a very administrative approach to managing funding to an approach where we are more a peer-to-peer relationship with the researchers, with the technologies, and we have people who can understand and engage with the projects. So this is part of the new approach for the European Innovation Council. So I didn't want to speak for too long, and the idea of this presentation was to give you, in fairly broad terms, an overview of the next program. As I mentioned, we are at a stage where we have agreed the design, the rules, the priorities of the new program with the Council and with the Parliament, and this was done before the European elections. What we have to do in the autumn is to decide on the budget, but there are also some other elements, such as the policy for associated countries, for third countries to take part in the Horizon, which is something that we consider is incredibly important, and also the synergies with other programs, such as the structural funds, where we want to make things much simpler and more operational. We are starting already to do the programming, the design of the new program. We, as I mentioned, have already started to build some of the new elements of the European Innovation Council. We have already started on the missions, and we had a call for members of mission boards that will help us to design these new missions. And we are also starting to think about the priority areas that will be in the first work programs. Our aim during 2020 would be to start to launch the first calls under the new Horizon Europe program. Of course, this is based on us completing the legislation so that we can start with the funding as of the beginning of January 2021. So there will be a very live period for the next 6 months where there will be a lot of consultations with the research community about the priorities, about the partnerships, about the missions, and about the European Innovation Council. So I should probably finish by saying the next program will cover a 7-year period from 2021 to 2027. Of course, this time period is a long-term time period compared to many countries, but it is not a long-term period compared with what is being discussed today. In fact, I think by the end of our program in 2027, there will still be some way to go. So, of course, this is one of the limitations that we have with European funding. We are a project funder, we have a 7-year budget, and then, of course, when it comes to the funding of the infrastructures, this is something that is done by national governments, done by member states, done by international partners. We try to support this process, to facilitate this process, in particular with the work of the European Strategic Forum for Research Infrastructures. And, of course, let me also say that for the European Commission, for Europe, having projects of this magnitude, global importance, is incredibly important. So we are here. We would like to be a partner in this project. We would like to help within our means and within our abilities. And going back to where I started, in 1993, the decision was taken not to fund the superconducting super collider in the US, but subsequently to fund the Large Hadron Collider. We will be facing this choice in the coming years, and it will be very important, and we very much appreciate all of the efforts that this is done in Europe. So this is what I had to say in terms of a first introduction. I don't know if you want to go through the speakers or whether you would want to see if there's any immediate questions.
I think, first of all, we thank you very much for your very informative and inspiring talk. There might be, however, some questions here in the audience left. And as we have time, Günther.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. You mentioned the importance and the future importance of collaborative efforts. In this context, I would like to bring up something which is of a concern for me since some years. In the last decade, especially the ERC grants, and there especially the advanced grants, have developed in some kind of figure of merit that distinguishes the really best researchers in Europe from the rest. Often people like to call it the Champions League. And so on. Now, these ERC advanced grants are given to individual PIs for very distinguished projects that only this or that person can do and nobody else. What we are doing here, as you also mentioned it, is exactly the opposite. I mean, it's in our DNA to do collaborative things, right? And this puts us at a disadvantage there. And an outside person who wouldn't know anything would just count the ERC advanced grants, would say, okay, these particle physicists are average scientists, whereas others are the much better ones. And I really wonder how you can address this problem.
No, thank you for the question. So I think the question is that on the fundamental research, we support individual scientists, individual teams, whereas in an area like this, what we need is a huge collaborative effort. So, I mean, you know, we've been looking into big science approaches. So if I look at what we've been doing on the FET flagships, which we've done, I gave the example of the Human Brain Project. That was a long-term approach. It's something that we're looking at. The other thing we're looking at is in the collaborative program, the global challenges, societal challenges. We've also had the concern that some of this has been too close to market. It's been about demonstrators. So we're looking whether there should be more of this research that is done at applied research or even fundamental research levels. If we look at what is happening on the European Research Council, one of the big developments is the introduction of the synergy grants. If you look at the budget for the synergy grants this year, I think it's over 300 million for the synergy grants. If I look at one of the first synergy grants, I think it was very much supporting some of the research behind the recent discovery of all the recent picture of the black hole. So we are kind of developing. If you look at the side of the ERC, there's the move into the area of the synergy grants. If we look at the collaborative projects, there is the move into lower technology levels. But you know, I take your point that none of this is exactly what is needed for this community. But I would also stress that if you look at the support that is provided, there is quite a lot of support, and probably an area that we don't recognize enough is the Marie Skłodowska-Curie training actions, which I know have been hugely valuable in the training of researchers in this area, but the point is well taken.
Thank you very much for your explanations. And as I don't see any more question here, so thank you very much again. And we have now Carlos Oliveira, also from the European Commission, who will tell us something about fundamental research as driver for innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be at this session, talking to people that are really writing the future, and no pun intended, but that are really, thank you, that are really working on the future of science and things that we cannot even imagine the impact that it will have for our species in the centuries to come. So I think it's very inspiring to me to be here. And I will start to talk a bit about what I've been doing so that you can see where I'm coming from. And I would like to share with you some ideas around the importance of innovation. Innovation, and in my framework, innovation is something that happens near the market, that creates value to the society, which can be measured by the creation of jobs, the creation of exports, the creation of value that allow us Europeans and non-Europeans to live better. So that's how I read innovation, which usually is in very high TRLs and not low TRLs, as we'll probably be talking here when we talk about fundamental research. So what I've been doing is mostly building startups. My first startup I created 19 years ago when I was coming out of university. I could have become a computer scientist at my university, but I decided to go to the dark side and create a company. And that company was eventually sold to Microsoft 8 years later. Since then, I've been working with other startups and creating other startups that have been delivering technology to different people. So for instance, the technology we built at Mobicomp was then introduced in Microsoft phones 10 years ago and other things. Also more recently, working with startups in artificial intelligence and in other areas. I've been in Portugal, Secretary of State for Innovation, Competitiveness and Entrepreneurship a few years ago, when the country was really in a difficult situation, and there was a perspective that if we would foster innovation and entrepreneurship, the country could come out of this very difficult period, which fortunately is happening, and I'm glad that I was able to do a tiny contribution to that with a more entrepreneurial spirit than really a politician spirit, which is not what I'm. I've been also, as Keith said, working with the Commission in trying to provide ideas and some background on how this European Innovation Council could work. And in the presentation, I'll try to explain also why the Commission thinks, and we as the high-level group at the Commission that helped the Commission thought that this would be very important to take Europe to back to where it was maybe a century ago, leading not only science, but as well leading the impact of that science in the society by creating products that people would use and companies would use, and that would allow us to develop as a continent. Also working in venture capital and several other things. So I'd like to start to give you an outlook of the innovation landscape in Europe. By the way, this is a picture that I took, so there's no copyright in there. But really, it's a bit white and a bit puzzling, because from one side, we all know, and all the rankings show us that we have great science, great scientists, but then from the other side, there's a lack of translation of that science into actual projects, products, into companies that really take advantage of the great science that we have to create new products, market-creating products that are the ones that can make the difference. I'll show you where we compare in these areas with the US and with China, and we are not looking good in that late or high TRLs. So based on this assumption, the Commission really did want to do things. And this innovation performance, we lack this creation and diffusion of these breakthrough innovations, not in the scientific perspective. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how then this science and this knowledge that we have as a society can be used to create jobs for the other ones that are not scientists and that want to live better. If we really achieve that, and this European Innovation Council wants to provide tools that we believe will help Europe to be more consistent in bringing these new large companies that can create lots of jobs, that can make us live better. The other thing is innovation transfer. By the way, I don't like the word transfer because it has a problem. It assumes that someone has the knowledge and will do a brain surgery or whatever and transfer that knowledge into the heads of companies or entrepreneurs. That doesn't happen like that. And this bridge between the scientific community and the entrepreneurs and the companies or established companies works well from time to time, but not consistently. And this is, again, one of the bridges that we need to overcome. And to dance, there needs to be at least two to dance. So this problem that is identified is not a problem because companies don't talk scientific language, or is not a problem because scientists don't talk the language of companies. It's an issue that needs to be sorted out by co-creating, by bringing people together from different perspectives and helping them sort out problems by bringing the best ideas and the best knowledge available. And if we find ways, and we have great examples in Europe here and there that these things have been working well, but not productized in a way that it happens naturally. It needs to be pushed a lot. And there's a huge opportunity for these scientific communities not to become entrepreneurs. I think it's the wrong idea to say now scientists need to become entrepreneurs. I don't believe in that. We don't want great scientists to become not so great entrepreneurs or the reverse. But there's an opportunity to cooperate more with entrepreneurs and with companies to bring value and ideas for these companies to provide products or services. And maybe when you are talking about the colliders, it's not, or the future collider, is maybe not what will come out of the collider in 10, 20 years, but maybe the process. There are lots of innovations that you are creating as you build these kind of mega projects that can be applied to society much earlier than the results that will come out of the research that you are doing. So, and fostering this kind of interaction with communities, with entrepreneurs, might also give you an additional perspective of the world, and also, in some cases, more pragmatic use cases than the ones that you are thinking as fundamental science. So I'm not saying that you should mess anything with the things that you are doing in terms of fundamental science. I'm saying that there's probably a byproduct that is very positive for society that, if these bridges are created, can arise. And the other thing that Europe is behind, and we are not at our full potential, is really the lack of scale-ups. We don't have that many large companies that can take these ideas and bring them to market in scale. So again, the EIC and other programs want to help to European entrepreneurs and European companies to use their full potential and grow more. So some important facts, and this is, again, great work done by the Commission that shows us that this market creating innovations, so innovations that really create new markets, create new products, create new areas. If we look at what is the present, the majority or the top 5 players are all American companies still. Soon, probably a Chinese company will appear in that top 5. No European company is near to be in that position. And I think that this shows us how in that future part of the, I don't know if this, oops, in this part here of the future, these are some ideas. What can we do as Europeans, and what you guys as scientists can do so that Europe can play a role here? When I say Europe, it's European companies, European entrepreneurs, so that we really can be in the birth of the companies of the future that will be leading the economy and making us a great society to live, because we can sustain our social benefits that we all value a lot. So those are the less good news. The better news are that many EU countries are starting to do well in startups. But again, startups are not an end in itself. They are just a transient status of companies that we expect some, or the majority probably will fail, and a few will succeed. And what we expect is that these few that will succeed will have more impact in the society than what they have today. And for that, we need funding. And Europe lags behind, massively behind the US in terms of venture capital available. So there's the need for money. And when we talk about projects like yours, even if we want to translate them to society, we need a different kind of capital. We need patient capital. We need capital that can wait more than 5 to 10 years, more than 5-10 years to get returns. And again, the good thing is that when we look at what the Commission is doing with Horizon Europe together with some instruments for venture capital that can be mixed together, is that we can have here an approach where for low TRLs there are grants that can be applied, and then when the TRLs are starting to be higher, then you can go into market kind of funding. But again, we are still behind a lot, as you see there. In 2016, there were $6 billion dollars or euros of investment in venture capital in European startups and companies, while in the US there was more than 6 times more. And this is also what is to be changed with the next programs. If you remember back to FP7 and even before, there was no funding even for pre-industrial or near-industrial TRLs. It was very difficult to fund these projects. And by the way, we have, in my perspective, a lot of great science in shelves, in universities, in a lot of centers that never was translated into the industry to create jobs and products, because there was no ability to invest that last mile that could prove or not that kind of technology or science could be, or knowledge could be applied to companies. So the other thing, and continuing on the funding, is that the majority of deep tech companies, even the European ones, the investment is coming from US companies. And again, it's not bad. It's great that they can have funding, but it would be even better if they could have funding coming from European sources. And this is an example of several European companies that are doing deep tech work. And there's a belief that these deep tech, which are not marketplaces or internet, very simple technological things, that these deep techs are the ones that can create companies of the future, because they'll be changing the market, bringing new products and all those things. And that's where science is very important. So in terms of funding, and Keith already talked about Horizon Europe, the current program that is in place introduced a lot of positive changes compared with previous programs. Integrated innovation, more than 1 billion a year for innovation. But it was not attractive to innovators, complex to navigate, the language was difficult, it was difficult to apply, not talking to the right message. And so that's why we need, the question is that why do we need an European Innovation Council? One of the reasons is this, is to talk to the right people, and this is the message. This is not the top 20 global, and this is internet companies, but it's the very same for the large companies. The 20 largest companies by market capitalization, they are the majority US and Chinese. There's not a single one that is European. And by the way, many of them are certainly using European knowledge, European science to achieve what they've achieved. So what's wrong with us that we cannot use what we have in our backyard in terms of science to translate it into value to our society? And this is a very important area. And so the challenge is to make Europe a global leader in innovation, and I would say again, because Europe was a leader in innovation early last century and even before. And so this European Innovation Council wants to try to overcome some of the challenges in terms of funding, in terms of attracting private and public financing to the equation, but also creating an awareness about the importance of entrepreneurship, about innovation, the value that this can bring to society, and that, by the way, people will fail. But if they fail honestly, it's not wrong, it's not a problem. And so this group of high-level group that the Commission invited to help in the past 2 years to try to bring ideas on how this new program would look, wrote this paper on Europe is Back, so accelerating breakthrough innovation, and we believe that these recommendations are important for the future of Europe. Of course, one is, we call it FAST, funding, which is empowering the innovator to have the right tool set and the right amounts of capital to to build things that are bigger than what usually they can do with a small piece and chunk of money. Also to bring together, and now with the EIC pilot that is already running, parts of that can be grant and other part can be capital in the company. Also creating awareness. It's very important to replicate the great examples that exist across Europe with a goal to make them more recurrent and less the exception. And there are several ideas running that. The other part is scale. Without scale, it's very difficult for these entrepreneurs, startups, or companies to have the right size to have a meaningful impact in the economy. They can have a great impact at local level or even at country level, but having a broader impact, for that they need to scale. And then again, we come back to the financing and funding perspective, but also to sharing programs and sharing ideas. And the last part of our recommendations was in the talent. So connecting people, and they are the biggest asset for the success of our innovation in Europe. So some of the instruments that are now being piloted at EIC and Horizon 2020 until the end of the current program, they brought some changes. We have the Pathfinder that supports future and emerging technologies with one-off grants, and that might already be a company or to be a company, and these companies then can apply for the accelerator, which is the next stage, where they can go and get a funding that is a blend between capital investment and grants, and with this having a much broader ability to raise the funds that they need for larger investments, even with public-private partnerships, not only investments from the Commission, but as well from the private sector. So there are a few numbers, Keith. I believe that these are still the ones that are in the proposal, but in Horizon 2020, there were 2.7 billion for between 2018 and 2020 to pilot these programs, and from 2021 to 2017, Horizon Europe, there will be about 10 billion. The figures are still the ones that were proposed, right? And part of it is really to help these entrepreneurs to really build companies and build projects that can be successful in the future. So the expected impact of these programs is that more innovations that create new markets of the future, that can have larger companies, so that really have an impact with this blended mechanism between grants and capital, that more people take risks and try to be entrepreneurs, or in case of scientists that don't want to be entrepreneurs, collaborate as chief scientist officers or other ways with companies and with other entrepreneurs. And again, understanding that potentially many of the work that you are doing, even the way to your goal, might be useful for society in day zero or almost right now or in the coming years. And also make this more accessible to people, so that people really understand that the Commission is helping on that. So I still have some time, and I would like to move to a bit of my learnings as an entrepreneur that I would like to share with you, because I believe that, providing these learnings might help others. And for that, I've got here a small video, but there's no audio, so I'll skip the video. So my learnings as a serial entrepreneur. So the first one seems very obvious, is that companies need to solve a problem. But sometimes people don't think like that, and they are creating startups because they want to get funded, and then they forget the larger picture. The companies exist because they solve a problem that someone wants to pay for. There is no company that exists, at least for a long period, if whatever they are trying to do doesn't suit the needs of someone else. So this is the first thing, and sometimes we lose sight with all this frenziness around startups and entrepreneurs. Then companies need customers. If you want to live as a company, you need to have someone that is paying your salary every day. And again, many companies or many startups sometimes forget this, and they think that the only thing that they need is to apply for new grants or apply for new programs or for new... No, they need to find customers. By the way, not only because customers pay, but because customers do an even more important thing. They validate what you're doing. If someone is taking a coin from the pocket to give you because of the work that you are giving, even if it's €1, that's a huge thing, because they really believe that you are helping them in some way, that they are willing to pay back for that. The other thing is that companies might need financing, and of course the might is there in italic, because of course they need financing, but the financing might come from different ways. If you start fast and have customers, you'll finance your company by your customers. You don't need to go to the bank or to venture capital. Of course, if we are talking about deep technology companies that will take 5 years, 10 years to have a product ready in the market, of course they'll need a lot of funding, because they need to leave before they have the first customers paying. But there's a thing here. Your end goal might take 10 years, but maybe in the period you can find ways to start monetizing what you are doing. And this is a very entrepreneurial kind of perspective, but that is very important, because then you start also to fulfill yourself with the fact that you are already helping people, are helping someone with your work, and this is important. And the other thing is that companies need an exit strategy, not from day zero, but as they go. They need to think what will be their future. They will become so large and sustainable companies that they can live by themselves, or the goal is to eventually sell the company to a larger company so that you can amplify the impact of what you're doing, or is to take it public. So there are many routes, and by the way, no one knows it from day zero. You might have ambitions and aspirations when you launch a startup or a company, but it's important as you go to define this exit strategy. The other thing is that being an entrepreneur is not about the idea. It's about execution, making things happen. You might wake up in the morning with 100 or 10 great ideas. You are not an entrepreneur because you have the 10 ideas. You might not even have the idea, but be the right person in front of that company to lead the execution and make it happen. So make people have the product ready to be used in the shelves or in the internet, whatever. The other thing is that things don't happen suddenly, and I think I'm talking to the right audience. When we talk about entrepreneurs, everyone thinks that things happen immediately. No, they really happen gradually. And by the way, innovation and the peaks in innovation, they are seen when you compress time. That's when you see the peak. There are incremental innovations every day that you can do in different areas, products, services, marketing, whatever in your organization. And then when you compress time, you see the disruption. There is no disruption like in a continuous timeline that in 1 second is like this, and then at least in my world, maybe in yours, when you do the collider working, you'll see that in our entrepreneurial world, it takes a bit more. And people usually tend to think that everyone is happening at speed of light and immediately, and it's not true. Then the other thing is that, as in science, a winning team is everything, or almost everything. If you have a great team, great people that believe in your goal, you can achieve a lot of things. The importance of boards of directors, mentors, people that can help you not pass by the same mistakes they already did, it's very important. The importance of the first customer, as I mentioned before, the second, the third, and all the customers, you need to keep them happy and learn with them. It's the best way to learn is with the customers. The other thing is that don't go with the flow. Don't think that to be a very successful entrepreneur, you need to have a Facebook or WhatsApp. No, you might impact an important niche and make a difference there, and that's really important. The other thing is that Excel is just a tool. Doesn't create a reality, and sometimes in this world people believe that they go to the Excel and say that sales will be like this and costs will be like this and blah blah. No, this is a model sometimes to prove a theory which might not be the right one, or the execution might prove to be wrong, and so people should assume that these are exercises to try to model what a company or a startup should do. The other thing is that the world is not balanced. There will be moments, and again, I think that this is again the right audience of very negative perspectives about the future, and that these companies or startups are not getting anywhere. And then suddenly things start to reshape, and then you got in a good trajectory. So, and the idea here is not to lose a lot of time trying to balance the world. Otherwise, you'll be spending the energy in a place that you can't do anything about, because you don't control all the variables to balance the world. The other thing that is very hard is when you have a company or a startup is to know when to stop. People get very passionate about their projects, about their products. Probably it happens to you as well as scientists, and it's very hard to let it go. For entrepreneurs, it's the very same. It's their babies. So having the ability to talk with the right people and say, well, my energy would be much better put in a different project where I can have the ability to be more successful and achieve my goals, then keep investing my time and my energy in this project that will not lead me to anywhere. And this is a very difficult call, as you know, and in your areas you'll see this even probably in a more clear way than in others, is that you might think that you are not getting anywhere, but you are getting somewhere. And this is where these things really... but the point here is that let's try to take the emotional part of our connection with these projects and have assistance to take these very difficult decisions. So my final note again is about the importance of this concept of co-creation, the opportunity that there exists for very different worlds, the academia, the researchers, to integrate and interact in a different way from the traditional transfer kind of knowledge perspective with companies, with entrepreneurs, with other institutions, for these people to get together, discuss what they want to achieve, and then openly innovate in finding ways to sort out that problem, which certainly will be much better than just companies thinking about the solution or scientists thinking about the solution. And so I hope this was a good moment for you, and I'm open for questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for this very inspiring talk. Are there questions to the speaker? You'll get the microphone. Hold on for a second.
How does it work in the US, for example? Do they also have such artificial administrative measures to boost innovation? Or just the system works much better there? Shouldn't we try to do the same thing rather than kind of what you presented?
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe more measures than we can even think about what we think as a very capitalistic open country. I recommend, if you haven't read a book called The Fifth Risk, and it shows how in the past decades, very different areas of the US government have been filled with a lot of money in terms of R&D and in terms of initiatives. Well, you all know where DARPA comes from, the lot of things that NOAA bring to public. So there were a lot of initiatives, public initiatives to fund deep technology and deep research that now is what fills many of the US companies. In terms of entrepreneurship itself, so the last mile, there are certainly a bit less probably artificial, as you mentioned, initiatives right now because the system in some areas of the US works. If you go to Silicon Valley, the model of Silicon Valley is the model that everyone wants to replicate, not Silicon Valley, but what happens is that companies flourish in some area. There were exits, so companies were sold or were IPO'd. People got some money in the companies, left those companies, created new companies, new startups that then were successful, that created more companies, and then there was a lot of money flowing there for people to invest in other people and in other companies. So that's what you see happening in Silicon Valley, what you see a bit in Boston, what you see a bit in New York, but that's what happens. So I'd say that from measures to increase the ability to do research that then could be applied to companies, the US has a lot, and I can recommend that book called The Fifth Risk, because you can see money putting from the Department of Agriculture to NOAA to whatever the departments were, DARPA and others, over the past 40 or 50 years. But by the way, while you wait, but again, there shouldn't be excuse that if those instruments don't exist, you shouldn't be able to achieve your goals. People have been successful without these public incentives because they have tried hard. These incentives, what is the goal? Is to try to make this not the exception, but more the rule, and to achieve more, and to get to more people. Certainly, anyone in any place can achieve their goals if they do the right things and put the right effort and energy.
But still, before reading the book that you recommend, you showed us the big difference in venture capital between the US and Europe. Now, what is the reason actually for this? Is this a difference in culture? Is this a difference in the economic system? And how is the situation, say, in China or in Japan, in Asia?
Yeah. China is developing very fast there, and there's a lot of money putting into the Chinese startups and the Chinese companies. But again, the model is very different from ours, as you know. Even the model in the US is different. One of the reasons why there's more venture capital in the US is that there are more exits. There are more companies. So what happens to a successful entrepreneur in the West that sells the company for hundreds of millions or billions is that then part of that money is put in funds, in VC funds, and that money revolves in the system. In Europe, we have less of those things happening. By the way, I think, and this is my perspective also, we look at Europe as one thing, and Europe is many countries, which is also what makes us different and I would say better. But of course, that also brings some more challenges to the equation, because when we say that, we have, I don't know, 400 million potential consumers for a product in Europe, and in the US, 350 or something like that. In reality, that's not like that today if you want to do a digital product, because you don't have a single digital market still working 100%. While in the US, you launch a product, you try a product in San Francisco, it works, and then you just click play and do that playbook and expand it to all the states, and then you have an entire, very large country working with that product. In Europe, it takes a bit more effort, but again, we shouldn't use that as an excuse, but try to take advantage from that.
Okay, so I don't see any further question. Let's thank the speaker
Thank you very
again. And the last speaker for this session is Jorgen. He will give us an update on the update of the European strategy, I guess.
Yes, you see me once more today. I promise you it's the last time, I hope. So if the slides come around, then I can state the obvious. I think many of you, if not all of you, are aware that we are on a kind of a roller coaster of updating the European strategy for particle physics. And I will try to give you a view on that, on where we are in the process, what's on the table, and what the next steps would be. Meanwhile, the real next step after this presentation would be a reception. And that would happen at the bar, more or less. So more or less shortly after this presentation, I can tell you already now there will be a reception. Very good. So the roadmap to updating the European particle physics strategy. So where to start? It's obvious that our main ambition is to understand nature, and this both at the largest and the smallest scales. And what did this bring us in the last decades, or even many decades, is the following. Particle physics today can be described on a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. That's what you find in the CERN souvenir shop, and that's a kind of an expression which helps you in describing the fundamental interactions which happen on the smaller scales. So that is describing matter at the smaller scales. What came along in 2012 was exactly this. We thought it was there, but since 2012, with the discovery of the Higgs boson, or in Belgium, the Brown-Tongler Higgs boson, this is engraved on the cup, and step by step, we start to zoom in on especially that part, and we've heard this morning from Nima that this is a very essential part of the model, and we should do all the efforts possible in order to zoom in profoundly on this part. But do not make a mistake. It's not because we have a clear description of how fundamental interactions look like that we have as well a profound understanding. And I told also Nima this morning, made that very clear to us. We've heard in Granada, for example, from Riccardo Rattazzi, that we have problems and mysteries in our current understanding of fundamental interactions. These problems related to dark matter, matter-antimatter asymmetry, these are problems which we might find a solution for in our current theory, in our current mathematical formulation of our theory. And then we have mysteries related to the cosmological constant, related to the electroweak hierarchy problem, and these might be very challenging to face and confront and understand in our current paradigm of particle physics. So there is new physics out there. Nobody would question that. So there is somewhere on the backside of this cup, or on a completely different cup, some part of that Lagrangian has to be written, which extends it, changes it. And the design you can put there is, of course, your own thought that would solve a problem, that would solve a mystery. And that would be our new physics. Of course, we don't know what it is. It might be a very simple design. It might be something very elegant. String theorists might recognize this. It might be something more surreal, and the Belgian content this might fit. In the end, we don't know. So we have to find for new physics, we have to add a design, test it, and if we find phenomena that would live on a different world, in a different world disconnected from our particle physics standard model world, one has to find the connection, and also that might be non-trivial. So there are no lack of ideas, there is no lack of ideas, of novel ideas on new theories, new models. However, there's no clear indication from experiments where this new physics might be hiding. So that's the situation where we find ourselves today. So this might be a strong argument to go for a very diverse, coherent, and concerted empirical exploration. And we've heard this morning from Nima, maybe the largest of the kind of humanity, at least in fundamental physics, since ever. So if we have the standard model, we might go beyond the standard model looking for that new physics in a variety of directions. We can go to higher collision energies in the laboratory. We can study rarer processes. We can study higher energetic phenomena in the universe, or we can look into an earlier universe. Where the new physics is hiding, we do not know. And in order to do that, we have to innovate technology. And I think this week is a key example on how we are innovating technology. Because we have to make what is invisible to us at these scales, we have to make it visible. So what is out there, especially on accelerator and the collider front of technology? And this can only be very brief, of course, due to the time. So the first, if we want to accelerate particles, the RF systems or RF cavities are key for this acceleration. We all know that the free electron laser put together at DESY and operational today at DESY uses cavities in the range of about 30 megavolt per meter. So that's the gradient, one of the performance parameters of these cavities. The other one, Q0, is a kind of a quality performance indicator. So 30 is the number you see there. And over the years now you see that even for high Q0s, we reach almost 50 megavolt per meter. So the R&D is making clear progress. Of course, the kind of procedures you deploy in order to reach these high gradients have to be understood, have to be reproducible, and have to be industrialized. On the side of the magnets, we heard this morning about the great progress of Eurocircle. There's another kind of magnet which is maybe not necessarily for accelerators, but to test superconductive cables, and that's the Fresca 2 magnet, which reached almost 15 Tesla last year, which is, of course, a great achievement, with a very large aperture, as you can see here. This is a plot reflecting this, so even with very few quenches, the 14.5 Tesla was reached. Of course, one has to do R&D on a variety of materials for these superconductive magnets, as we've seen here that the critical current density going through these cables as a function of the applied magnetic field, this is niobium-3 tin, so if you want to reach at least 1,000 amp there per square millimeter, you have to go beyond the niobium-3 tin materials. So one might have to test a hybrid solution. For example, take the Fresca 2 magnet, you plug in another material to bring it to a higher level beyond the 16 Tesla. And this will be tested as well in due time. These magnets take a long time to develop. We've seen in Granada as well these kind of timelines, so for the RF systems and for especially the magnets, and you basically see every jump of 2 Tesla brings you 10 years in the future. So by the time you reach 16 Tesla, we are, let's say, 30 years in the future. And on these timescales, one has to consider as well alternative and novel accelerator technologies. Examples are laser-driven or beam-driven plasma acceleration. You see here the maximum beam energy as a function of the years, and these are the, let's say, conventional or traditional techniques we are using, reaching, let's say, the electroweak sector, reaching the multi-TeV region. But also these plasma accelerators, the technology might reach, if you extrapolate, also the electroweak region. Of course, energy is only one of the performance indicators of an accelerator. Luminosity is another one. So with these innovations in technology, one can dream about, one can design concrete proposals for colliders, and I will show you the 4 which are being considered at CERN, and obviously also some which are being considered outside of CERN. The one which is closest in time, if approved, is the LHEC, an electron-proton collider, which would operate together with the high-lumi LHC. The electrons would come in with an ERL system, for which a demonstrator setup is being put together at Orsay. It's called Pearl, and the first RF systems have been tested successfully there. So this will allow you to make EP collisions beyond what was true at Hera some 10 years ago. Another one is the high-energy LHC. We heard about that today. You can deploy there a variety of collisions. The main driver there is the development of the high-field magnets, which will take you 20 years in the future, and basically you will double the energy of the current LHC. Another one is CLIC, a linear collider which can run in 3 different stages. The first one of around 11 kilometers in length would reach the TT bar threshold, near plus and minus collisions, and stage upgrades would reach in the end 3 TeV, and that would culminate into a 25-year running period. The technology there is to have a drive beam that generates the power, transmits the power to the main beam, where the particles are in the end accelerated. The topic of this week, the FCC, again, a variety of different collisions, from leptons to protons to ions, and of course, the variety, staged or not staged, maybe a future option, etc. And here, especially this week, one should highlight the Horizon 2020 Eurocircle study that provides a design study for the 16 Tesla magnets. Of course, there is a difference between the circular colliders and the linear colliders. One of the parameters of a collider is its luminosity. If you plot the luminosity as a function of the center of mass energy, you see that the circular colliders, lepton colliders, are dying out, while of course, that's due to synchrotron radiation, while basically you have a flat dependence for the linear colliders. And let's say the handshake point is somewhere around the TT bar threshold. What have you outside of CERN? What might come earlier in time is an electron-ion collider being developed in 2 different designs, one at Brookhaven, one at Jefferson. So that's to collide electrons and ions, obviously, but with an opportunity to collide as well electrons with protons. So that might help you in exploring the structure of protons. Another one, the International Linear Collider, is considered in Japan. That would use superconductive cavities, many of them embedded in a liquid helium vessel, which would end up in cryomodules, which would be your main blocks to build up an accelerator of around 250 GeV, center of mass energy. Another one, the CEPC, is a Chinese version in some sense of the concept of the FCC, which might have EE, but also PP and other kind of collisions, and that is being considered in China. Another one, maybe for the further future, is a muon collider, and that needs a very strong, concerted and a global R&D effort. Colliding muons is far from being trivial. You have to produce the muons, for example, in a proton beam, then you have to capture them, you have to put them in bunches, you have to cool them, you have to accelerate them, also in fairly large circles, and then you have to bring them in collision. That is far from trivial, but might be something the strategy process would like to consider for a further future. Okay, if you put everything on a timeline, so what would happen in Japan, China, and what is being considered at CERN. Obviously, the first one that comes to mind is the high luminosity LHC. This is the only one on this plot which has been approved and is really a project. On the European scale, what might come first is an EP collider, and then you have a lineup of a variety of what I would call first generation E plus and minus colliders, which would culminate into a Higgs factory, and then at a later stage, the proton colliders, including the heavy ion part. So we can only explore our aspirations in particle physics if we innovate technology. And key in this sentence is the we. It's nobody else that does it for us. We have to explore and innovate the technology. That means our field of high energy physics is highly driven by our innovations in technology. And if we want to look at the future, I think the strategy should certainly consider to foster, or programs to foster, the most talented researchers with aspirations in instrumentation, in computing, and in software, as well as to foster global R&D programs for the technologies, and as well explore synergies with adjacent fields which might face similar technological challenges. The first place where all these innovations in technology come together is obviously the high luminosity LHC. The high luminosity LHC will perform at least equally good as the LHC, and will bring together a luminosity which is a tenfold of that. And it will bring us 20 years in the future. So the impact of the current LHC is obviously that blue box which has been engraved on the cup. We are step by step zooming into the Higgs sector, and it allowed us the first exploration of the TV scale for new physics phenomena. Obviously, we all know that the initial designs we've put there are not accepted by nature. So we tend to show exclusion plots, and I will not do that today. I just mentioned that our initial designs are indeed not really accepted. If we start zooming in the rest of this cup, basically we're measuring many cross-sections of a variety of processes in PP collisions, from jets to Ws, Zs, top quarks, Higgs bosons, and every kind of permutation of them. Over 8 orders of magnitude, we find that the measurements agree with our predictions. That means that cup does not break. So there's need for more data. But do not despair. Due to, again, our innovations in technology, we will have more data in the next 20 years. And just to put that on one slide, the accelerator is being upgraded in a variety of aspects, and the different detectors, all 4 of them, are being upgraded either now or either in the next 5 to 6 years. So that's coming to us, and this slide contains a huge amount of innovation. And be sure, in order to succeed in this program, we need much more innovative minds. If we make possible these research facilities, then we have an aspiration to zoom into that data and to make progress on a variety of different parts of our particle physics research. Standard model Higgs, such as beyond the standard model flavor physics and heavy ion physics. I will not go through the 5 volumes because that would take probably a full day. Just to bring out one thing without really having a plot. What we know today about especially the Higgs sector is the first look into that blue box there. With the enormous amount of data and surely the innovations which are coming to us, we will zoom into this part much better. To state the obvious, but I think one should state it frequently, there are ample opportunities at the high Lumi LHC to explore nature and to pursue innovative thoughts, and this for the next 20 years. This is key to us. Coming to the Open Symposium, last month we had an Open Symposium with above 600 participants to discuss the update of the European strategy. So compared to the previous talk, this is the only beautiful picture I have. It's not taken by me. We were sitting on the other side of that mountain in a bunker. So let me see if this works. Okay. So in Granada, we had parallel sessions, and these parallel sessions were revolving around a variety of physics topics. We talked about the technology, and they were revolving around basically 6 physics topics which can help us in finding where the new physics is beyond the standard model. They are noted here. Let me start with this corner, flavor and CP violation. So that deals, among the particles we know in the standard model, that deals with the three families of particles of fermions we have, and that deals as well with the matter-antimatter puzzle we have as well. So if you look in the light sector, that means the lightest quarks and the lightest leptons, there are a variety of measurements one can do in order to break the standard model. It's typically to break the standard model. Electric dipole moments, processes where muons decay to electrons is a fairly rare process, and to study rare kaons. EDMs, you can measure these EDMs for a variety of particles, and the new concept there is to put them in a storage ring. So that would obviously increase the performance of these measurements, and that's being envisaged to put a storage ring at JEDI and to start later next decade. The lepton flavor violating processes, they are very sensitive to new physics scales, and the new variety of projects that are being proposed, they will give you 4 orders of magnitude improvement in sensitivity. 4 orders of magnitude, we zoom in into the unknown, and we might find a way where the standard model breaks. Kaon beams, of course, you need very intense kaon beams in order to study rare kaon decays, and these are very difficult experiments, but probably experiments that cannot be missed in the portfolio of particle physics. Just to give you a snapshot, on the axis, and I have to be careful, I cannot read it from here, the kaon decaying, the K-long decaying and the charged kaon decaying, the current experiments which are running have a sensitivity depicted here with the colored bands. If you will take on board the upgraded, or let's say the next generation of these experiments, these colored bands are basically shrinking to a level which is phenomenal, zooming in into potentially physics beyond the standard model. If you look in the heavy sector, so you look at the heavier quarks, third generation leptons, then here you have the famous fits of the CKM matrix. You see here this potato is reflecting the uncertainty you have in this fit. And if you bring on board all the data, all the performance indicators you might have at the running Bell 2 experiment and the upgraded LHCb experiment, basically the potato is disappearing. For the future, and especially for this audience as well, the FCC might bring you a large amount of B quarks, a large amount of Z to BB events, and that would be a goldmine for flavor physicists. As Antonio Zoccoli called it in Granada, flavor physics is usually the usual graveyard for BSM electroweak theories. So that's clearly a place where you can try to break the standard model. The take-home message, these are challenging experiments, but a must-have in the portfolio for particle physics to explore where new physics is. Outstanding reach for beyond the standard model physics. Important for the technology point of view is the identification of particles, so that should be part of the next generation experiments as well. The different environments, be it EE and PP, are complementary, and surely a Z factory, especially a Terra Z factory, would be a fantastic tool for flavor physics. Next topic, neutrino and astroparticle physics. So that deals with these particles here. So if you want to measure the neutrino sector, you have to measure a variety of parameters. They are depicted here in black. But you have to attack that from different corners. Every neutrino source is counting in this picture. For example, if you want to measure, or let's say, get to know the nature of the neutrinos, this can be done with neutrino-less double beta decays. If you come on the CP and mixing angle part, you have to look at the long baseline neutrino experiments. If you want to look for example, sterile neutrinos, you might use reactor neutrinos and also the atmospheric neutrinos in typically astroparticle physics experiments can help you there. So a variety of opportunities, but also a plea to combine all of this in a coherent program. So, take-home message, challenging experiments are being prepared to measure the masses, the mixing, and the natures of neutrinos. It might be an essential portal to new physics. We don't know, of course, but it might be important for discovering where the new physics is. Important information will come in the next few years on sterile neutrinos with running experiments. And because we have little guidance where the new physics is, an opportunity might emerge to explore the synergies with adjacent fields. For example, with the field of gravitational wave physics, astroparticle in the multi-messenger era. Next, strong interactions. So that deals with the quarks and the gluons. So strong interaction, the strong interaction is governed by the theory of QCD. Theory of QCD, one of the main phenomena there is the non-abelian gauge structure, which brings in a running coupling. If you run the coupling to high momentum transfer, then the coupling becomes very small, and basically you can do perturbative calculations, and that means the quarks and the gluons live somewhere in the vacuum. On the other side, if you go to low momentum transfer, then the coupling becomes very large and the perturbative calculations break down. We have to use other techniques, for example, lattice QCD, and with that, we can verify how these quarks and gluons live in a very hot and dense QCD soup or QCD plasma. So in there you see that the strong interaction alpha S is measured with a precision today of about 1%. If you want to measure and study electroweak and Higgs physics at future proton-proton colliders, you would like to bring this down to the level of a promille. So how can this be achieved? Certainly you will hear about this week. This can be achieved typically, for example, in E plus and minus colliders where you have a large luminosity. This can also be achieved in hadron-hadron colliders as well, certainly for the running of the coupling, and lattice QCD might come in as well. With the right level of innovation in lattice QCD, you might match the future precision as well. But again, with the right level of innovation in lattice QCD. So, in the vacuum part, where the quarks and the gluons are deconfined, they live on their own. That means they are described in the Lagrangian, which I showed on this cup of tea, cup of coffee, and they are described with first principles. Of course, if we look around us, what do we see? We see ions and we see hadrons, for example, the proton. And there, these quarks and these gluons are confined in a hot and dense QCD soup. So these are used in applications, these are used in our experiments, and there must be a link, of course, between one and the other, how these partons fit into the confined region. So on the upper part, how the quarks and the gluons fit into ions is typically can appear in two phases, a Gauss phase or a plasma phase. And the difference between those two can be depicted in the typical phase diagram where you have temperature, collision energy if you want, and the chemical potential or the density of the particles if you want. And you see the Gauss state, the plasma state, and there's a phase transition between one and the other. The freeze out here has been calculated with lattice QCD and has been measured with the ELISE experiment. And they match measurement and prediction, they match very well. On the side, how the quarks and the gluons live, for example, in the proton, this is depicted typically with PDFs in the Q-squared momentum transfer X space, where the evolution equations of these PDFs come from QCD or from our reasoning, and from the experiment you have to measure the parameters of these PDFs themselves. So it goes without saying that to explore this diagram, you need facilities which involve heavy ions. In order to explore this diagram, obviously you need facilities involving protons. So what have you in the future? With the high Lumi LHC or the high energy or the FCC, obviously you go to higher luminosities, you go to the low chemical potential region, so that's this region, but high energies, and you probe there the quark-gluon plasma, for example, with new probes. For example, at these energies, you might even use the top quark as a probe. Fixed target experiments at the SPS, but as well at the LHC, will help you. For example, here at the SPS, you go to larger densities, and the fixed target experiment at the LHC or the high Lumi LHC, they make the bridge between the LHC and the SPS. On the side of the protons, structure of the protons, obviously with the proton collisions themselves, by measuring cross-sections, you can infer as well more information on the PDFs up to, let's say, a factor of 2 improvement. Dedicated experiments, electron-proton experiments, will bring you further. The electron-ion collider will be a first step, potentially beyond the collinear model, and then at higher energies, so beyond the Hera energies, you can have the LHEC or the FCC EP, and again, if you would like to reach the 1% precision on the cross-section of electroweak and Higgs processes, you better measure these PDFs to the level of that, what would be reachable with these machines. Take-home message, a hadronic structure program with EP, PP, EA colliders provides vital ingredients for a precision exploration. The hot and dense QCD program at the SPS is unique and is very useful to explore the QCD phase diagram. At higher energies, heavy ion, proton, and fixed target programs, at the LHC or future proton-proton colliders, it's unique and very essential for a profound understanding of both nuclear and particle physics. And the high luminosity plus and minus collider at the electroweak scale helps you for high precision QCD. The axis of electroweak and Higgs physics, a very relevant one, of course, in the context of discussing a strategy. So it deals with, amongst others, these particles. So here you have a very dense plot, but let me step by step try to summarize the plot. So for example, in an effective field theory, you might model the Higgs couplings, and here you have 13 of these parameters which can be measured, and on the y-axis you have the scale of the precision by which you can measure these. I'm sure from the back you cannot read this, but you start with the high luminosity LHC, and then you dive in with new and future colliders. In order to make it maybe more accessible, you have the same 13 effective field theory coefficients here, and a variety of future colliders there. The darker the color becomes, the larger the factor of improvement you have beyond the high luminosity LHC. It's obvious that for the full FCC program, the color is very, very dark. And for the, let's say, first stages of an E plus and minus collider, there's a handful of these boxes which are dark. To zoom in even further, you see here on one picture, in some sense, a view on where you can go in the Higgs sector. The first generation of E plus and minus colliders, these 4 of them, will bring you for, among these 13 quantities, for around 10 of them, a factor of 2 improvement, and around 3 or 4 of them, a factor of 10 improvement. Second generation, if you want, or an upgrade of these E plus and minus colliders, will double the number of quantities that you can measure very precisely, and the full FCC program will bring you to the ultimate level of precision. Take-home message. Measuring Higgs couplings is perceived as one of the prime avenues to search for new physics. We heard this morning why. With the high Lumi LHC, we can probe already profoundly to the almost percent level for most of these couplings, the Higgs sector. Additional to the high Lumi LHC sensitivity, the proposed first generation E plus and minus colliders can achieve major improvements, and they are comparable for, let's say, all of these first stages, first generation E plus and minus colliders. In the second stage, a very high energy E plus and minus collider, or ultimately the Hadron Collider, are important to reach the ultimate sensitivity. Beyond the standard model and the dark sector, of course, if you look for new physics, these might be avenues. Of course, you have many avenues, many models you can put there rather than the question mark. The first one, a very simple one, a sequential standard model. That means you have a Z prime which couples in the same way to fermions as the Z boson. Of course, the higher you get with your collision energies, the larger the mass you can probe of these Z primes. But also for the E plus and minus colliders, you can have indirect sensitivity to higher scales beyond the collision energy itself. But it's obvious that the highest energetic proton-proton collisions will bring you further there. But the message is not always so black and white. If you look on this picture where you have the mass of such a particle and the coupling, at large couplings, it is the lepton colliders that will outperform the hadron colliders. At lower couplings, so when the coupling becomes smaller, weaker couplings, it are the hadron colliders with their luminosity that will give you a better performance. So the answer is not always black and white. And obviously, this was a fairly simple model. You have many, many more models, so that's not making the picture easy. Dark matter. Dark matter, of course, the first you might ask where to start looking. This is the range where you can have dark matter, the masses of the dark matter particles, from extremely tiny, tiny small to almost the size of the universe. Of course, where to start? If you bring in the assumption of thermal equilibrium in the early universe, you basically are zooming into this region of around MeV, GeV, or a few hundred TeV. That green part, in that green part, which is the same as this green part, you have light dark matter models and you have weakly interacting massive particles, another type of models which are very well known in the community. This is the hidden sector. That's where our dark matter is living. Of course, it has to talk to the standard model through a portal, and that portal could be a variety of known or unknown particles. And this will give you a list of very interesting phenomena, long-lived particles, feebly interacting particles, etc. Just to give you a few plots, this is the spin-independent, I think, cross-section of dark matter with the nucleon versus the mass. So the interesting range for the dark matter models is around a few tens to a few hundreds of GeV. And here you clearly see that the collider facilities, especially the PP colliders, and here the indirect or the direct detection measurements are very complementary. This is a model where let's say the mediation between standard model and dark sector is through a standard model mediator. I can do something similar with a BSM, so yet unknown mediator, but the message is the same. The complementarity at typically lower energies of a few GeV up to a few tens of GeV between collider reach and the direct reach is there. To what extent can current and future accelerators probe feebly interacting sector? That's, of course, also challenging. Feebly interacting, that means there is new physics living and is coupling very, very weakly with the standard model. And you might have a variety of simplified portals to model this. Dark photons, dark Higgs, axions, sterile neutrinos, etc. And from these you can come to benchmarks. In the end, you have a coupling or a mixing and a mass scale. And on this plot, you can clearly see that the precision frontier, for example, in beam dump experiments as well, will give you very large sensitivity at a low mass. The astroparticle physics comes in there, and the colliders come in there. So again, a plea for exploring these synergies. Jorgen is pushing me with a 0 there, so let me go a bit faster. There's only a few slides left. So to search for new physics, which is not living in the standard model, it can appear everywhere. So that means also in adjacent fields. So exploring synergies with adjacent fields might be very relevant. And that brings me to the point of the strategy. We have today a strategy written down and approved in 2013 by the community. And now we are going to update that strategy by 2020, such as to put on the schedule the future, and that means the future beyond the high luminosity LHC. This is the schedule, the timeline for that. The first box here on the left was the preparation, the organization, the input collection. And last month, we went to Granada for the Open Symposium. All that information will be summarized in a physics briefing book that will be given to the European Strategy Group, which will come together for a drafting session early next year and would present to Council a document to consider for approval in May 2020. But let me go out with a personal thought, and that's the last slide. There is new physics to be discovered. What I take from Granada clearly is that everybody realizes there is something else that we have to discover, and we have to do an effort. But as well, people tend to believe, and they're probably right, there's no guaranteed discovery path. And let's bring it in the Belgian context to end with. I'm sure this week many of you will try to sample Belgian beer. And I'm sure many of you would like to seek your kind of taste in a variety of beers. If you break down the taste of beers, you can break it down in different directions. Juiciness, bitterness, herbal, berry, citrus, you name it. There's not a single beer that covers all of them. There's not a single beer that covers all of these tastes, all of these avenues where you might find your taste. And we are in a bit in the same situation. If you want to discover new physics, you might have to sample or you might have to explore different experiments and put them together in a wise strategy. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jorgen, for this very broad overview. Questions, comments, corrections, criticism? No. So I guess that brings us to the end, right, of this session. The next item is, I think, the reception. And Jorgen promised, unfortunately the slide is gone, promised us Belgian beer at the reception. And that was the reason why I let you talk 5 minutes over time. Thank you very much again.
So maybe I can... Is this working? Is this working? Yes, it should be working. The reception would start at 6 o'clock. I was told as well, if you would come 10 minutes earlier, you might find something to drink as well.